Welcome back to my channel, Star Booze.
Stan Laurel has a unique talent for making people chuckle, and his charisma as part of the legendary comedy duo Laurel and Hardy still resonates today, but behind those laughs, his life was filled with difficulties. That went well beyond what most fans knew, from devastating personal losses to battles on the professional front. Stan's one of the most difficult aspects of my existence. The catastrophic blows he faced were losing his son to the awful grip of death. Before we go into the grief and loss, let us take a moment to remember amazing events of Stan Laurel's life. He made millions of people laugh, and full image of the man behind the comedy, Arthur Stanley Jefferson, or as the world will later know him as Stan. Laurel was born on June 16, 1890, in his grandparents' home in Ulverston. Lancaster's parents, Arthur J. Jefferson, touring actor and theater manager, and Margaret, an actress, were too busy performing to raise a baby on the go. In his early years, Stan lived with his grandparents, George and Sarah Meatuff, and getting very comfortable with the town of Ulverston. Stan wasn't simply hanging out. While playing with toys, he absorbed the sights and sounds of attending church with his grandparents at Holy Trinity, and apparently acquiring a major sweet taste for beer trickle toffee from Gillam's General Store. Stan's love stage kicked off just over the street from his grandparents' home at the Hippodrome Theater. His playhouse had a wooden canvas ceiling, and parents performed that his father would develop some of the plays he'd become famous for. Right there, while Stan was growing up, he wasn't simply playing in the streets. I was watching performances and getting familiar with the enchantment of theater. Sadly, in 1910, the Hippodrome burned. Stan set sail that same year for America, but we'll come to that later. Movie Stan spent some time living with his grandmother, Sarah Meatuff, in North Shields before attending schools such as King James First Grammar School and the King School. Ultimately, his family packed up and relocated to Glasgow, where Stan's father, the Metropole Theatre, was managed. Stan has definitely caught the fever for performing at 16. He jumped into his first performance in the theater, World Professional Performance at the Panopticon in Glasgow. This was also the time when you undoubtedly understood that getting paid to making folks laugh was quite good. Stan made the transaction in 1910 when he was 20 years old, joined Fred Karno's group and adopted the stage name Stan Jefferson. This is where things really began to get interesting, because his buddy Trooper wasn't just anyone. It was Charlie Chaplin. The two future legends were traveling around practicing slapstick comedy, likely attempting to outsmart each other. Stan even got the chance to be Chaplin. Understudy, they both hopped on the ship to the United States, and the rest is comedy history. While the world was at war, Stan registered for military service. However, due to his deafness and being a resident alien, he received a free. He wasn't going to let it go. Anything hinder his journey towards comedy. Greatness following the Karno troupe. Stan disbanded in the spring of 1914. I did not merely sit around waiting for the next big thing. He hooked up with a couple of other former Karno performances, Edgar Hurley and his wife, Ethel, together. They created the Three Comics, and they followed the suggestion of their booking agent. They decided to brand themselves the Keystone Trio, as a tribute to the famous Keystone Cops, which were all the rage. During this age, comedy was prevalent. Stan began experimenting with his character imitates his old Charlie Chaplin. Meanwhile, Hurley began portraying the roles of the silent film stars Chester Conklin and Mabel Normand. They had a successful tour from February until October of 1915, but the three eventually broke up, and Stan moved off to new adventures. Between 1916 and 1918, Stan collaborated with Alice Cook, and Baldwin Cook will form the Stan Jefferson. This cooperation was more than merely for the stage. Alice and Baldwin became longtime friends in 1921. Stan's path crossed with another. Oliver Hardy was an influential individual. We briefly worked together on the Silence short The Lucky Dog, but it wasn't yet. We all know the famed collaboration. Stan and Love met about this time. Actress May Dahlberg suggested that his stage name was Stan Jefferson. Unlucky since it has 13 letters. Like any good superstitious performer, Stan switched his stage name to Laurel and started fresh. It wasn't long before Laurel was offered $75 per week to star in 2 genuine comedy, and he jumped at the opportunity after creating his first film. In May, Universal made him an offer.contract, but it frequently goes, and Hollywood's deal did not last long. A studio rearrangement resulted in Stan was unaffected by the cancellation, and May were seen together in various. The films include the 1922 satire Mud, and Sand was a film with its own brand. 1924, Stan had fully committed to the world of film, signing contract with Joe Rock to star in 12 True Comedies. There was a quirky condition connected to the contract. Dahlberg was not permitted to appear in any of these flicks, Joe Rock believed. Stan was held back by her rage. Back in 1925, when May began interfering with Stan's work, Rocky offered her a financial settlement and a one-way ticket back to her native Australia. May have accepted, and that was the end of their partnership. But Stan's, my career was only getting started. Stan made a series of films between 1924 and 1925, comedies including Mandarin, Mix Up, and Detained. By 1925, he had directed or, despite co-directing, 10 silent short films. He did not appear in them, however. His eventual comedy sidekick, Hardy, did make appear in 3 of these flicks. Yes, Nanette Wandering, Papa, and Madame Dieter Mystery Laurels. Career has slowly moving forward, even though it wasn't quite the formidable duo, but the wheels. There were plans for him and Hardy to becoming one of the best comedy combos of all time. Stan Laurel's next significant move during his career. He signed with Hal Roach Studios, once had huge plans to focus on writing and directing. He even directed a film in 1925. In that film, he plays a character named Nanette. Future comedy buddy Oliver Hardy has a role as Babe Hardy, but life had different plans that same year. Hardy, who was a member of the Hal Roach the Studio Comedy All-Stars, got into AA. Culinary incident resulted in the hospital with Hardy out of commission. Stan was invited to come in and perform in the film Get Him Young, is where everything Stan and Oliver began taking turns, sharing the screen together, and the magic began to happen in early 1927. Laurel and Hardy were a staple on screen. The couple starred in various short films, including Duck Soup Slipping Wives with Love and Hisses. The couple's chemistry was undeniable, and it did not take long for the folks at Roach Studios to note. How did the crowd respond to their antics? Director Leo McCarey sees the potential, started teaming them up more frequently, ultimately giving birth to the legendary Laurel and Hardy series later. That year, the team swiftly became one the most popular comic performers of the silent film period. Produced a substantial compilation of short films such as The Battle of the Century, Should Married Men Go Home To, Tears Be Big, and Big Business. The beat was so natural that even the move to talkies in 1929 wasn't slow. They recorded their first sound film. Unaccustomed as We Are was a hit. They made their debut appearance in the feature picture later that year as part of the review sequence in Hollywood Review of 1929. The following year they appeared in all-color Technicolor. In the musical The Rogue Song, 1931, Laurel Hardy achieved another milestone with their first full-length starring feature, Pardon Us, and they maintained the momentum. going to make both films and shorts. Until 1935, their 1932 short film The Music Box even won them an Academy Award. They came in first place for Best Short Subject. Of the world's comedic gold, but as anyone who's ever hit a high note understands, things cannot remain perfect indefinitely. During the 1930s, Stan's life became more difficult. Laurel and Hal Roach had disputes over contract issues that resulted in a serious dispute for Roach. Separate contracts for Laurel and Hardy. With varying expiry dates, this meant that Laurel's contract was Hardy's, was not up, so Roach kept Hardy there. The studio and paired him up with others. Comedians like Harry Langdon for in the 1939 picture Zenobia, there was a mention of creating a new series with Hardy-Patey Kelly called The Hardy Family. Lauren was having none of this, so heshewed Roach for the contract problem. The legal dispute eventually died out, and Laurel returned to Roach Studios, but the connection was never exactly as similarly. It would not be long before both Laurel and Hardy had decided it was time to walk away from Roach for good in 1941. Laurel and Hardy inked an agreement with 20th. Century Fox agreed to make 10 films over 5 years, but much to Lauren's surprise, the pair was employed exclusively as actors have no creative influence over writing, staging, or editing of films. It was far from the creative. Roach nevertheless provided them with the freedom they were accustomed to. The films were a hit, and the success of Laurel and Hardy increased. More freedom they gradually began adding, their own material and creating these. They would continue to make more personal films. One of the most legendary duos in entertainment history, but only as the star shone brighter than ever. The catastrophe occurred on August 7, 1957. Oliver Hardy died in 1957, and with him went half of one of the most popular comedies duos in history. The news hit Stan Laurel. Like a punch to the gut, Laurel lost. His dearest pal, his creative partner, the only person who truly comprehended the weird, dazzling beat. They shared that he was too unwell to attend. Funeral, yet quietly heartbreaking. He said Babe would understand, and if you knew anything about them bond, you'd realize that was probably accurate. However, Hardy's death did not just mark the end of a professional alliance. Mark the Laurel's performing career ended despite receiving offers to return to the stage. He turned every single one down. Not because of pride or stubbornness, but he simply has no interest in working without Hardy for Laurel's act. It was not the same without Babe, and honestly, nothing ever really was again. Despite how painful that loss was, it was much Laurel had to deal with one catastrophe. His personal life was full of heartbreak, drama, and enough turmoil. The world saw a man who created them. They didn't realize how much he endured when the spotlight dimmed. Behind Stan Laurel's slapstick, the brilliance and distinctive bowler hat were a man whose private life frequently felt more like a sad melodrama rather than a comedy. While fans chuckled at his on-screen, Laurel was silently carrying the weight of heartache, scandal, and deep personal sorrow, none greater than that devastating loss of his young son. Lauren's romantic history alone reads like something from a soap opera. He never legally married his early partner, May Dahlberg, but they survived. Since 1919, they have been together as common-law spouses. Dahlberg played a vital role till 1925. During his early career, she even helped invent the stage name Stan Laurel. But when producer Joe Rock determined that Dahlberg was holding Laurel back professionally, he purchased her a one-way ticket back Australia. She departed, but the drama did not finish over a decade later in 1937. Dahlberg returned to the United States and sued Laurel for financial help, just as he was going through a horrible divorce. With his second wife, the lawsuit stated, adding insult to injury, the case was settled out of court the public. The spectacle was one more sad note in already tangled personal symphony, but nothing compared to what occurred in May. In 1930, Laurel's first wife, Lois Nielsen, they had given birth to their second child, Stanley. Robert Laurel is a boy. The pair came 2 months prematurely. I held out hope, but unfortunately, baby Stanley died only 9 days after his birth, for a man who had spent his entire career bringing joy and happiness to others. Loss was a private, devastating sorrow. Laurel never said much about it, publicly, but probably left a deep scar, no amount, of slapstick Lauren's anguish could be dulled by applause. Marriage life continued to tumble into a complex chain of marriages and remarries after divorcing Lois in 1934. He married Virginia Ruth Rogers in 1935. That broke apart immediately. He said, "I still had feelings for Lois, but I was not interested in rekindling things." Then Ilana Shuvalova arrived in a storm, union that ended with claims as wild as Laurel attempting to bury her alive. The marriage collapsed in the backyard and burned in 1940, then maybe out. Of habit, Laurel remarried Virginia Ruth Rogers again, only to divorce her. In 1946, he did it again. He married Ida Kiteva Raphael, who stayed by his side to the end of life despite all the public mishaps, private mourning, and headline-making divorces. Stan Laurel keeps appearing on screen with a smile, but behind its smile was a man who had endured much. More than his fair share of grief, losing child, losing love repeatedly. He soon lost his closest creative. Partner's life was portrayed as tragic, black and white, much like the films that made him a star after the curtains. Based on the renowned Laurel and Hardy collaboration, Stan Laurel took a quiet move out of the spotlight, but not from the hearts of his fans or the esteem of, while his days of performing. Where behind him, his legacy continued to flourish. Even though he lived in lowly conditions, in 1961, the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences acknowledged Laurel's a significant contribution to comedy with an honorary Oscar for his creativity. Pioneering in the field of movie comedy, although too feeble to attend the event, Laurel had an influence on himself. Undeniable Bob Hope introduced the prize. Danny Kaye accepted it on his behalf, a heartfelt gesture that spoke volumes about how much loved and appreciated. Laurel remained in entertainment. Despite having appeared in nearly, with 190 films, Laurel lived out his final years not in a Hollywood house, but a tiny, unassuming flat in the Oceanana Apartments in Santa Monica had not spoiled him. In fact, Laurel kept his phone number was made public. Directory and frequently asked fans calls himself, he took satisfaction in responding to fan messages and never lost their humility. That had endeared him to millions. If you were lucky enough to phone him, he could just pick up and talk like an old buddy. Comedians who followed in his footsteps. Jerry was frequently sought out as a mentor. Lewis did not only visit him, but incorporated Laurel's influence into the bellboy names the main character, Stanley, and adding a character. Based after Laurel, performed by Bill Dieter Richmond, Dick Van DJ shared a similar experience as a young performer of DJ Kadee. I discovered Laurel's number, contacted him, and I was invited over for a visit later. Van DJ paid respect by depicting him in an episode of The Dick Van DJ Show, where not only demonstrations of admiration, Laurel's acknowledgments, humorous DNA lived on in their work. Director Stanley Kramer offered Laurel a cameo in It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, along with other comic greats such as Buster Keaton and the Three Stooges. Laurel rejected it down, resolute. Regarding not appearing on screen without, Hardy reportedly didn't want to. In his elderly age, his commitment to his late partner was resolute. Still, Tiny Hint was envisioned as a background shot, featuring a duplicate dressed in Lauren's iconic bowler hat, sitting in an old convertible. Even that tiny tribute was eventually reworked with the cameo, going to Jack Benny, who was wearing Laurel's Stan's hat, makes the final cut. Laurel may have stepped away camera. He never truly left the stage. Through comics, he mentored fans. He was charmed by the timeless films that Laurel's legacy endured indefinitely. Figure in the world of laughter, silent, kind, and still striving perfection joke until the finish. And speaking. At the end, Stan Laurel spent last year silently far from the spotlight that had previously followed him by the mid-60s. His health was beginning to disappear in January 1965. Doctors discovered an infection on the roof of his mouth and conducted a battery of tests. In February, he experienced a heart attack. Only a few days later, on the 23rd. He died away quietly at his armchair at the age of 74. No huge fanfare, no dramatic conclusion, just a calm goodbye from a guy who once created the world laugh without saying a single word. The funeral was held in the Church of the Hills. In Los Angeles, it wasn't a huge Hollywood extravaganza, but it was full, with individuals who actually admired Dick Van Dyke, who had developed close to Laurel in his later years, gave. In his eulogy, Van Dyke described him as more than just a humorous hero. He saw him as a buddy and mentor. Buster Keaton was also paying tribute to someone else. Stan believed he was, in his own league, was interred in Forest Lawn, Hollywood, Hills Cemetery, and he might have been gone. His influence was everywhere. It wasn't only the 190 movies or the stardom. He leave a legacy. Hardy, the laughter they sparked together, and the template they created for every comedy duo that came after,